Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. To be Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time. In order for us as poor and oppressed people to become part of a society that is meaningful, the system under which we now exist has to be radically changed. It means facing a system that does not lend itself to your needs and devising means by which you change the system. The life of African Americans in our culture seems to be a topic that everyone has an opinion on in this day and age. Whether it be from the growing racial tensions in America, which sparked the Black Lives Matter movement, or the growing Afrocentricity inside the African American community, Black culture may be at its highest point of interest. I myself am a growing Black woman, raised by a single mom in the city of Baltimore, a city that seems to be under the microscopic eye of the world. The history of Black people in America is one that is heavy and hard to ignore. And despite the decades of time past, it is one that is repeating itself. Which brings me to my knowledge question. How does the memory of African American history affect the present-day culture of African Americans? Which I will discuss in the light of the past and present civil rights movement.
Mass incarceration has become a major focus of the civil rights movement taking shape around police shootings, over-policing, and the Black Lives Matter movement. When I sat down this week with actor and activist Danny Glover, who's been fighting for civil rights for over 40 years, it's one of the first things I asked him about.
Impact people's real life. Now, if this becomes mass incarceration, Black Lives Matter, or the Dream Keepers, all those become a movement that begins to look at the real historic issues that have prolonged and continue to exasperate themselves in the 21st century here in this country.
The parallels between Black Lives Matter and the civil rights movement are almost undeniable. But in order to understand the new movement, we must understand the past. The civil rights movement sparked nearly 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, a document that produced the first generation of free slaves. Black people throughout the country, but primarily in the South, were segregated with multiple forms of oppression, like race-based violence, which included the death of Emmett Till, and Jim Crow laws. Activists used nonviolent protests to bring change. Eventually, the federal government made initiatives for doctrines such as the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and the Civil Rights Act of 1968. The civil rights movement brought forth many leading activists in the African American community, including Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, Angela Davis, and Stokely Carmichael, and many others. The start of the Black Lives Matter movement is unclear, but the phrase Black Lives Matter sparked after George Zimmerman was found not guilty by an all-white jury for the trial of Trayvon Martin. The hashtag was created on a social media post and shared widely. Activists began using the phrase in demonstrations for Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, and more. The Black Lives Matter website defines Black Lives Matter as an ideological political intervention in a world where Black lives are systematically and intentionally targeted for demise. So why are the movements different? Besides the obvious difference in time, some may argue that the Black Lives Matter movement does not have a clear, organized selection of leaders, but several sub-organizations under the movement, whereas in the civil rights movement, the leaders were nationally known and identified. Others criticize the movement for its occasional violent outcomes and have named it a hate group.
I think they're a hate group. They hate police officers.
Well, they have.
It's not a black issue. This is not a white issue.
It's a human issue.
It's a human issue. It's an accountability issue. It's a responsibility issue. That's what it is. They made this about race. This was never about race. This was about right and wrong.
While it may be true that leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement are scattered around the country, There are names that are nationally known, such as D. Ray McKesson.
I've been to many cities where the police have been violent towards people of color, and there have been many people who've traveled around the country in solidarity to stand with people to make sure that these stories don't go unnoticed.
I asked you if you traveled.
As far as the issue of violent protest, the civil rights movement fought for racial injustice the same way Black Lives Matter does. But because of the way it's remembered, it is popular belief that the movement did not call for any violence. The movement actually invited it. In Martin Luther King Jr.'s letters from Birmingham jail, he states that his goal was to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. Violence was critical to the success of the 1960s civil rights movement.
The Black Lives Matter is really a call and response. It's a response to the virulent anti-Black racism that our society faces and struggles with, and it's a call to action that we take the time to dismantle.
So why is the memory of African American history so prevalent to our culture now? Because our history teaches the lessons of the past, and the new movement may change the way we remember the past movement. This is an important issue because the racial tensions in America are at a high, and there seems to be no coming change. But with the awareness of our similarities between the two movements, maybe some of history's lessons can be retaught.